only 21% that what companies delivered was adding value and was aligned to strategy. But what have you seen yourself around? Is it still a problem?
I think it's safe to say that it still is.
We've seen situations where they were informed about engineers were facing. You can see their frustration when they start saying, well, if I had known, I would have removed that blocker out of the way. And at the same time, the engineers get frustrated because they feel like they don't have people trying to support them.
Engineers are difficult. I have empathy for that for sure, but I think it's on the product owner to slow down if they need to.
Hardest statement is usually, I don't know.
Yeah.
People don't dare saying, I don't know.
There's this great word in product, and that's discovery. It really liberates you and allows you to say, we need to do some discovery on this. When you've got a good sponsor, you're excited to take, puzzles or problems to your leader because you know they'll be interested. And then rather than dreading governance or going to a senior leader, you can't wait because you feel like it's a space where you can have fun and solve a puzzle together. It's a fundamental failure if leaders think they're too busy to do that because, you'll see it. The velocity of the team will be slowing. An engineer is having a problem with refactoring code or understanding the performance of a database or these sort of things. Being able to convert those concepts into plain English, so then someone more senior that maybe is not technical can understand those, being able to empathise more up and down that chain, I think that is very, very worthwhile.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our next episode of Leading the Shift. I'm today with Chris. Chris, you've been working in Australia for quite a while, specializing in innovation and driving transformation within large organizations. And today we're going to talk about the Rosetta Stone. So maybe as a start, we can talk a bit about this concept of, how do different part of the organization communicate and how disruptive is this communication between those different areas? Do you want to start?
Yeah, that's great. And great to be here, Matt. Thank you so much for the invitation. When we were getting ready for this chat, actually, we were talking about this problem of linking senior executives to product owners to engineers. And the way that I was thinking about it is a translation problem. And as we were talking about it, the idea of the Rosetta Stone came up. And really what was amazing about the Rosetta Stone, of course, was the fact that it had these languages on it and it really unlocked hieroglyphics. The thing that I didn't know until recently was I always thought there was only 2 languages on it, but there was actually 3, and being able to triangulate between these languages was the transformation. And I think that this is really good for when we're thinking about leading the shift because these 3 big groups of senior executives setting the vision and the strategy, product owners, product managers at that middle layer, and then engineers, these 3 big groups of people don't always understand each other. And sometimes they choose not to understand each other. And I think where I've seen it work, and we'll talk about this as we move through this discussion, I think having empathy for those different points of view and being able to translate, what the strategy or the vision is, and that going down into the teams, the product managers being able to interpret and understand, and then having a meaningful discussion with engineers, but not having endless meetings with engineers, so they can crack on and get the work done, I think is really, really fundamental and important. And where it works well is when that flow of information is truly two-way. Translation is not just from the strategy down into the product, down into the code, but it's also from what people are doing on the ground It doesn't have to be an engineer. It could be someone working on organisational change or working through a regulatory obligation, whatever it might be. But there's this concept of detail and making things happen, interpreting, and then flowing back up to the strategy. So it's got to go both ways. And I think this is the fundamental problem to solve. When it's solved, it's very exciting for everybody in that chain. When it's not solved, people will use the words, whatever it might be, failing fast, agility, whatever, but they don't necessarily understand. There's lots of good examples, and we can kind of dig into that.
No worries. And maybe we can start a bit with the impact of having this misinterpretation between those different layers. Like I know we had a report a few years back that showed that only 21% that what companies delivered was adding value and was aligned to strategy, right? And I think a lot of organizations have evolved in that aspect. But what have you seen yourself around? Is it still a problem?
I think it's safe to say that it still is. I think that often, and if we think about these three layers, I'll come back to that again and again. I think that when a particular direction is set for a piece of work, and it could be, the annual operating plan for a particular product, or it could be what are we going to go after, particularly when it's taken a lot of effort to set that direction. There's a lot of sunk cost that goes into that. And as the work is unfolding and people on the ground are saying, maybe things aren't quite landing the way that we expected, having the ability to be able to share that learning back up the chain and inform the direction that's been set. When organisations can do that, you're okay. But if we're starting with the challenges start of the equation, it's when that can't happen. And the way that organisations often deal with that is that they'll drift into things that they can manage and they can report on, and they can get comfort on reporting on a milestone, or a project deliverable. And I think that separation, and the product model, of course, is all about what's the outcome you're trying to deliver, and are the experiments that you've run for a particular period of time, are they, delivering on that? I think that when, and I've seen examples when on a particular piece of work, the organisation feels committed to a particular course of action, that's when you get into trouble. And that the signal coming from the people doing the work versus the people interpreting the work and interpreting the strategy, and then senior leaders, when people at those different levels aren't necessarily telling the whole story. I'm not talking about deception, not at all. It's you're always making these decisions about what is happening. You're interpreting that, and then you're telling a story about that. Might be up to senior leaders, or might be to the people doing the work. And I think being able to do that in a free and open way, and the safety that that individuals have in that chain is super important. So you can understand why that 21% number is true, because sometimes in that chain of people, the safety isn't there necessarily, or there's a feeling that we're committed to a particular course of action. We've learnt new things that's going to question that particular first direction that was taken. and there might be an unwillingness to change. I think they're the failure modes that organizations sometimes face.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when we talk to senior leaders, like we've seen situations where they were informed too late about certain circumstances
Yeah,
that
that's right.
engineers were facing.
Yep.
And you can see their frustration when they start saying, well, if I had known, I would have done something about it. I would have removed that blocker out of the way. And they get frustrated because they feel like they don't get the right level of information that drives the right outcome. And at the same time, the engineers get frustrated because they feel like they don't have people trying to support them or listen to, the direction that should be taken.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I've been in those meetings. And I think that sometimes the puzzles that engineers are facing are difficult. And sometimes they're difficult to understand. An engineer will be very upset or frustrated about a particular challenge. And often the person at that middle layer, the responsibility is completely on that person to go in, understand completely, and then faithfully summarize whatever the issue is. Sometimes those things can't be boiled down, into a soundbite. And, it's understandable. Senior executives do need the summary. They do need the TLDR. But sometimes, that concept of pulling the andon cord and stopping production, so then the real problem can be solved. Anybody should be able to pull that cord. And it also means that the senior leader might have to stop as well and say, hey, there's something going on here and I really need to understand it. And I think all of those three layers, there's responsibility on the engineer to kind of call out the issue, that they're often the most open about that, for the product person to be able to slow down and understand. I think there's that. And then the product person being supported to talk to the senior exec and say, hey, we need to slow down here because of whatever reason. And I think there's a hope. People cross their fingers and hope that this particular problem will just work itself out. Sometimes it does, but often it doesn't. And the reason that those things aren't flagged sometimes is just the psychological safety for that the product owner to kind of call it out. Maybe a failure mode is maybe not enough support. We're going for a particular target date. We can't miss that date. And I have empathy for that for sure. But I think it's on the product owner to slow down if they need to. And it's on the product owner also to say, oh, I'm not sure about this thing. Something's going on. I need time to understand it. Very challenging to be able to say that. And the senior leader then creating the emotional, psychological safety to be able to, for the product owner to say, hey, something's going on, but I'm not quite sure. These are the failure modes.
It's interesting that, in our very high velocity and high quality delivery world, it's always difficult. It's the hardest question. The hardest statement is usually, I don't know.
Yeah.
People don't dare saying, I don't know, because it's meant to be proof of a certain failure when in parallel, we learn that failure actually teaches you something, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think what's interesting when we think about the product model as an example, there's this great word in product, and that's discovery. And I remember when I first started to understand that in the context of I don't know, it really liberates you and allows you to say, we need to do some discovery on this. What you might be saying is, I don't know, but the truth of the matter is, you probably don't know. And being able to walk around with that ambiguity for a little bit longer, being able to, draw on human-centered design and all of these things to be able to do qualitative and quantitative discovery, to be able to flesh out a space, and having the thinking tools to work with and grapple with, I don't know. It's liberating. It really is liberating, and it gives the product owner a language that they can say things with confidence, and to be able to grapple with, I don't know. It's really, really, that's the empowerment right there, to be able to draw on that language and to be able to talk through and then think through a particular puzzle that the team's working through. So yeah.
And so you talked about these 3 layers, right?
Yep.
In general, from your experience, what are the best tools? You talked about empathy, the need of empathy, for example.
Yep.
But what are the best tools to actually make sure that you can move them into this kind of alignment and, talk the same language?
Yeah, that's really good. I think rituals are really helpful. So I think that's something that Agile and Scrum brings to the table. The idea of a stand-up, the idea of retros and sprint planning. I think these are very, very helpful rituals. The reason I'm talking about these rituals is when you're bringing together engineers and product owners and then senior leaders, a senior leader can plug into that. Hey, I'd love to kind of come to big room planning if you're talking about a quarterly planning and setting OKRs, or I'd love to drop in on a retro, and then the leader having the humility to say, how am I turning up, and all of these sort of things. So I think there's a behavioural layer that's very helpful. I think there's a language layer. And there's no reason why engineers can start to that leaders can start to understand some of the challenges that the engineers face, and similarly for engineers to understand the strategy. A lot of engineers are very interested, in the business problems that are trying to be solved. So you've got the rituals layer, you've got a language layer. I think spending time together and to open up that open dialogue and understanding between what the business is looking for and the challenges or otherwise to be able to deliver that. And so I think they're the big things. These are human problems. There's this concept of adaptive leadership, and this idea of holding space. So then people can build trust with each other and start to engage in dialogue and then have tougher conversations. Not everything is a technical puzzle. I think sometimes people treat all puzzles as technical puzzles and why aren't we solving this? And often it's because the space hasn't been allowed to be created, and safety and all of those things. So then people can start to have more candid conversations and then, cross that threshold of trust. So then you can say something to a senior executive and they're not going to overreact. And good leaders do that. They might be nervous about something they're hearing about, but they'll have the empathy and the skill to be able to hold space so that conversation can be had, and then the real underlying issues can be discovered and then worked through.
It's interesting because we hear a lot about how executive, for the past 20 years became more and more tech savvy.
Yep.
But we don't talk very often about how engineers in the past 20 years became more business savvy. So I still remember, probably 30 years ago, you would have had someone telling you, we need to upgrade this Oracle database version in, say, why, the famous 5 why.
Yeah, that's right.
Why? Because it's out of date. Why should someone really be concerned about that? And then you would get to the, well, actually, because your financial system upgrade will not be possible, which will mean that you can't adapt to this new, regulation that came in.
Yeah.
And you're like, here you go. This is where your strategic leader will be interested by what you're saying. But it was usually, a conversation to get there, where nowadays, actually, it's more fluid, I find, don't you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a dance that goes on. And when you see it working really well, everyone's got a job to do in an area of expertise, but there's a mutual respect between those different groups. And when you can feel it, when you're in a room and you're working through a puzzle, you get excited when you go to a governance meeting because it gives you a chance to kind of share, puzzles to solve with your leaders. And when you've got a good sponsor, you're excited to take, puzzles or problems to your leader because they'll be interested. And they're not just worried about a milestone being at stake. They're interested in solving the puzzle with you, and it becomes fun, And I think this idea of not having problems to solve, but puzzles to solve, and that puzzles are fun to solve, and you've got a group of people that see things in a slightly different way, but they're all joined together by this strategy or this vision, it becomes really interesting and worthwhile. And then rather than dreading governance or going to a senior leader, you can't wait, to take the latest thing that's gone wrong because you feel like it's a space where you can have fun and solve a puzzle together. So this is the environment to create.
It's also breaking a bit this business and technology, like we're a piece in IT, right? Of trying to say, well, the moment business, and technology work together and not as a subcontractor of business,
Yeah.
right? But we understand that it's actually a critical part of making business successful. Then there is vested interest in aligning the languages, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we were talking before about translation and this idea of, kind of strategy to interpretation to execution that goes up and down. All of those arrows are two-way. Ultimately, they're just nodes, where you've got a strategy as one node, execution is another node. I think it becomes really interesting when one is forming another is informing another. And I think the only way that you can create that network of nodes is when they share the same language, and they have a way of interacting with each other, and they have the respect to interact with those different nodes in the network in a way that person can understand. I think the more that these nodes treat each other with respect, understand where each other are coming from, building, not consensus. Consensus isn't the way, but mutual respect and understanding, even if you might end up going in a different direction. Yep. And even if you might end up disagreeing, but I understand where you're coming from. This is perfect, this is where it needs to be.
So we're talking about different tools to ensure this alignment.
Yep.
What about things which drive objective downward? Like we talked a bit about OKR earlier,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
What's your thought about the OKR framework?
I mean, I think, what do I think about that? I think the whole idea of OKRs, when it really comes alive, is when you've got different teams that have got a shared OKR. So, you were talking about, the subcontracting of engineering and the business person, and they're different. If they've got the same OKR, I think that's great. And they're both invested in the same objective. I think the other thing that is really important, and the best way to use these, the OKR as the thinking tool, is where, the annual operating plan is clear, the objective is clear, and then that puzzle, if you like, is brought to the team. And then the team is kind of saying, we could definitely do this, in the next 3 sprints, and we can validate in sprint 4. And I reckon that a bit of contingency and, there's our 6 sprints for the quarter. I think we could do this. And then when that happens, everyone walks away and we're clear and let's go for it. That's good, and everyone's excited at the beginning, but it really comes to strength when something goes wrong, and you're in the middle of the 3rd sprint, you're about halfway through your quarter, and engineers are worried about something, and being able to pivot. And we talk a lot about pivoting, of course, but the only way that you can pivot is if the objective is understood. And then being able to respond to that, I think, in a meaningful way. And then being able to, maybe one of the key results, we'll stop going after that, or we'll double down on another one, or we might introduce another one as, we'll do an edit halfway through the quarter. And being clear on that, and having the flexibility of mind to be able to do that, and not to feel like you're going to get in trouble at the end of the quarter. I think this is the way, and you need to be able to explain what's happened, and not being afraid. I think to do that, and when teams liberate in that way. And they have the freedom of movement to be able to do that. But in the spirit of accountability, great. I think that's the magic triumvirate of making OKRs work. So, yeah.
And there's also this decomposition. We see that with a lot of customer where sometimes we throw at teams things which are so big, they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, that's right.
But the fact of taking things from a strategic level, like you could be a department or a value stream and say, I want to reduce by 30% my operational cost. If you throw that at the team will be like, let me think about that. But if you decompose it, and let's say you've got a product specialized on onboarding, right? And you say, well, actually, we want to reduce the cost of onboarding per customer from $50 to $20, right?
Yep.
And then you turn to the team that is in charge of one part of the process and say, hey, what can you see? And say, well, actually, we duplicate across 3 different systems. Maybe we could automate that, right? You do a bit this translation of OKRs downward so that whatever OKR you set for the team for a specific period of time is intricately aligned, right, to the strategic direction.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've seen many times when this works really well, the leader has got the kind of, knowledge. I think it's a technical thing, understands their business sufficiently where they can make that transitional step between just a overall objective, reduce costs, to something very focused. the only way that you can make that step is when you've got knowledge of your business. I think that's needed by leaders, the interpretation layer. There's a dance that goes on, a discussion that goes on. I think the other thing that's really interesting about that as an idea is you might say that that's the objective that you want to go after on board, reducing onboarding costs. And you might want to give the team the freedom to just focus on that and, 3 to 5, key results of that particular objective. And that's it, rather than often this watering down that goes on, because not only is the team being asked to do that, but they might be asked to, bring down tech debt or, improve their risk profile or whatever it is, or build another feature or whatever. So I think the other element, I think there's decomposition. I think there's this concept of, reducing work in progress and focus. But focus, it's amazing. It's really, really liberating for teams when they've got the freedom to be focused, and then the space to focus on particular puzzles. I think this is something that the leader can often give. Maybe the product owner or product manager could ask for that thing. I think the leader giving permission for focus, it's really liberating for teams. So, yeah.
I think you're a big believer of walking the corridors, right? For strategic leader to make sure they understand the context of not only the product owner, but the engineering teams, and really live a bit in their life, a bit like in the traditional Japanese models, right?
Yeah. I think there's two modes of interaction that are really helpful. One leader, I remember, he had a team of about 900 people, and he used to do this thing of 1 on 15. And during the course of the year, he spoke to all of his people. So I thought that was really good. And then a click below that is living the experience of people, sitting with them, understanding all the permissions that are required, all the password management, all the controls that might face an engineer, as an example. And then at least having some, it's this thing about understanding and respect, of a challenge that a particular person is facing. I think lots of great innovators do that where, the famous one, of course, is Elon, where he'll go to the engineer and tell me what the problem is. I want to see it. And spending the time to be able to legitimately understand the problem. And then not necessarily, I don't think executives need to solve all these problems, but at least understand these problems. I think this is really, really important. I think it's a fundamental failure if leaders think they're too busy to do that. Because, you'll see it. The velocity of the team will be slowing. Maybe they're not being as ambitious, or their tech debt is starting to build up, whatever it might be. And the way that you see that is that the team is slowing down. And then rather than someone being in trouble, at least understanding first what's happening here. What's the challenge that the team is experiencing? There's no getting out of it. You've got to get into the detail and understand the challenges of that team. And whether it's, listening to your customers, or whether it's, sitting with an engineer or a product person, or, being on the coalface in training meetings, whatever, to really understand what's going on, I think this is key.
And now that, we're in the generation of AI,
Indeed.
right? Do you see an issue with AI coming into this mix? Like suddenly senior stakeholders will have access to information faster. Some of the AI work, some of the engineering work will be done by AI. You might have engineers saying A, AI saying B. How do you see that, entering the
Yeah.
Rosetta concept?
Yeah, I'm not an engineer, but I can certainly say that understanding AI, when it's used well, we've seen the adoption of AI from junior engineers, not as much as senior engineers, because they, understand the code and are able to check the work that's created. I think that is really interesting. I think being able to, it's a different set of thinking skills, I think, that are emerging. How are you framing your question? And the way that you're thinking about the problem space. And why is this important? Well, that informs your prompts. And I think what it will mean is that analytical teams will need to spend less time generating queries if they're looking at big data sets, for example, less time generating those queries and more time thinking about the queries. And I think that everybody is going to go up that pyramid of abstraction where a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by AI or writing basic scripts and what have you, or very complex code. And then the thinking is more and more and more on what is the problem we're trying to solve? Where are we trying to position ourselves? What would success look like? All of these abstract questions, and being able to ask and answer those questions in a more meaningful way. I think you can. The other thing that AI means as well, we were talking about empathy before. What it will mean is if an engineer is having a problem with refactoring code or understanding performance of a database or these sort of things, being able to convert those concepts into plain English, so then someone more senior that maybe is not technical can understand those people. I think that's very exciting, very interesting. Being able to empathize more up and down that chain. I think that is very, very worthwhile. Very worthwhile. I think that if people can leverage AI to be able to bridge some of those gaps of understanding, very worthwhile.
So what about risk, compliance, security? They're in some way intricated, right, within this whole exchange chain, and they're meant to be part of this conversation, especially to support, make sure that the teams are going into the right direction, supporting the senior stakeholder and making sure we avoid specific risks. How do you see them fitting into that end-to-end conversation?
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about the engineering layer, product owners and senior leaders. I think in regulated environments, I think risk compliance, they're so critical to the whole puzzle of bringing things to market and them being effective and all of those things. I think there's a couple of things in here. The first one would be when those risk folks have got, they're not those risk folks, but they're in the scrum, they're part of the team, it becomes very interesting because they're bringing a different perspective, a completely different point of view. And I think when they bring that and it's meshed in to the team and they're not seen as a checker, but also as a maker themselves, and they're thinking about the puzzles to be solved and they're part of the solution, it becomes really interesting. And I was talking about fun before, it becomes fun. I think that the risk and compliance people that I've worked with over the years, the ones that get involved and don't see themselves as separate, and they're more on the maker side than on the checker side, it becomes very, very interesting, and they end up adding lots and lots of value. I've seen risk professionals now really embracing AI, and they're testing it, they're understanding it, and they're enthusiastic about it, rather than being worried about it or being concerned or flagging, things that need to be addressed. Really seeing it as an opportunity rather than as a threat. And I've seen that work really, really well when they're closer and they come together. And it's funny, we were talking about this earlier. It reminds me of Gene Kim's book, The Phoenix Project. And you might recall that there was a risk professional in that book. And originally he was separate from the team, but he ultimately let go of his black folder and was part of the scrum, was part of the team doing the work, and became enthusiastic and respected what people were doing, and understood where the team was trying to go, and then think about how they could be part of the solution as they went. And I think that's very relevant today. AI just represents another set of problems and threats and opportunities to be understood by this multidisciplinary team. Risk and compliance are best served by feeling part of that team. I think you can still do segregation of duties and still have oversight and all of those things, but seeing it as part of what's going on rather than separate. And I think I've said it a couple of times, this maker-checker idea, if you've got those folks that are part of the making rather than exclusively the checking, it becomes really, really interesting, because this team has now got a completely different point of view as part of their group. So,
Yeah. And you've worked most of your career in the financial institutions
Yep.
and in insurance institution. What's your take on where they are in this translation between, strategy and execution, embedding risk
Yep.
and security in there, knowing they're effectively very regulated?
It's mixed, right? It's driven by people.
Hmm.
When I think about that question, I don't necessarily think about organisations necessarily. I think about great partnerships that I've had with individuals. And those really effective partnerships have been underpinned by mutual respect and understanding and all of these sort of things. It's not good enough to just know your domain really, really well, and lack empathy or respect for, those around you. I've seen that.
Hmm.
Doesn't work well. But it's really, really worthwhile when those individuals are reaching out to their other disciplines. I think what organisations are doing really, really well, and organisations that I've worked in have done really well, is to create the environment so that can happen. And I think senior leaders should continue to do that, create that truly safe space to be able to have those sort of discussions and foster that respect that we've spoken about. I think for individuals, you don't have to do it. It's super easy to learn about a different domain now. You can go into ChatGPT and say, hey, what are the 4 steps I need to do to learn this particular thing just to get started? There's nothing wrong with that. So you can build that common language. And it's kind of a nice way to wrap it up because it brings us back to where we started, which is this idea of translation and the Rosetta Stone.
One question is, if you wanted people to, go away with one key point for senior stakeholder, product owner, engineers, one thing to start doing and one thing to stop doing to make sure that they can, support this whole communication end to end, what would it be?
I think start doing would be have a look in your diary, set aside some time where you can be with some of the people that are doing the work. Do that on a regular basis. And then create, if you're in the middle, and then creating time for your leaders to get closer to the people doing the work. I think it's this. I think this is the number one thing. You don't want to create sympathy for others necessarily. I think it's empathy, creating this environment of respect, of mutual understanding. So, and I think the best way to do that is time with each other. So that would be the thing to start doing. Stop doing. Stop doing so much. I think that busyness can be a sign. A lot of people talk about this. Cal Newport is probably the best on this, the concept of deep work and slow productivity. I love Cal's work. But this idea of doing less, obsessing over quality, reducing your work in progress, it doesn't mean that you're not working hard necessarily, but focus more and do less things. I think these would be the things.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you for joining us for this episode.
Thank you so much, Matt.